listing out my favorite moments from each Dragon's Rescue Riders episode. What's up everybody, this is Willie, and today's video, we'll be continuing on this new series that I had started only a couple months ago when I first did it for a Backyardigans, and that is naming every one of my favorite moments from every episode. So this time, I'll be doing this for Dragon's Rescue Riders, this spin-off show that I like a lot more than most of the DreamWorks Dragons community, but also a lot of people who watch this channel do love this show. So yeah, likewise, you know the drill, but if you're not that familiar, let me iterate that I'm going to talk through every episode chronologically and name a specific moment that I personally like the most out of it, and also give some honorable mentions as well to add a bit to the scale. In full disclosure, just like I did with the other video, my picks primarily come down to my memory of them, as it's been well over a year since I fully watched back the show, so some of my memories of stuff could have waned, but I'll still effortlessly try to highlight as much that are ingrained in my memory. With all this being said, let's get straight into the video. Let's begin things with the nest. I mean, to consider, we had the opening sequence, which is a fine enough start, you know. While the general community did not give a lot of good raves from the moment the dragons talked, I didn't care. It was a unique sort of establishment for this particular show, but I didn't choose that one. The moment they saved Duggard is something to take note of, considering how important it is leading up to the plot of the episode. I did like the part where Winger and Dak succeeded in destroying Magnus's machine as it caused a wreck, but I didn't go for that. And then the last part is the final moment where they officially settle themselves in the Hooties, which was cool in a way, but I feel like my personal take would probably be the moment that they began to settle themselves in Hutskalor. Like, everything is what really is the establishment of the setting that they would find a sense of belonging to. And while, yes, the end part would be where cements are, I do think the moment where they obviously meet the townspeople and begin to immerse themselves is something that feels more special for this show entirely. Next up, Deep Trouble, and there's a bit that I can list out. I mean, the starting sequence when Layla and Dak were basically challenging each other with their dragons on who's better, with the latter obviously coming out on top, was something, I guess, in a way to start this plot of the overconfidence from Dak and Winger's end. Hey, moving to the arising action, I'd say the part where they reunite with Elbone was at least something notable, especially with the glee they expressed, knowing that their rescue mission is partially succeeding. But personally, I think the moment where Layla and her group was able to save them all with a nice reunion with the siblings was definitely a lot more touching to me, so I ended up going with this. Then next up, Boo to You, and pretty much I only have much of the end sequence to really consider in contention. I mean, the whole fight with Lurk was something to note of, and Burble getting his coronation moment of being the one to take him down, that is something remarkable. But I personally think my favorite moment is literally at the end when Cutter got, I guess, his comeuppance for the amount of hubris he had with insisting he has no fear just for a little spooky story to start terrifying him, and culminating with Burble being the one to frighten him. That's just so hilarious and definitely proved how much Cutter is an exaggerator. But yeah, final end sequence, and definitely my personal pick. Then we go to Where There's Smoke, which again was pretty much significant for the introduction of aggro, but to talk things through on a moment that I like, I mean, there were some contenders. Like, I can say the moment that they properly meet aggro, where she would clear the air to them, was something to merit her character and why she was using the fire to trap the sheep, because it was protecting them from the predators. But I didn't go with that. I can say Winger's speech to Cutter was something at least impactful, but I didn't choose that. And then the fight sequence with the wolves, where they were alright, but I think I would just definitely pick the moment that Aggro stepped in and saved the day, which would end up resulting herself becoming a member of the team. So through that, I think this is easily a part that will stick out to me, especially since it's in line with the story of how she joined the team to begin with. Next, we move on to Heavy Metal, and I can barely recall much outside of the back third, so the moment that I think is definitively the best might as well be the moment where the remaining group trapped inside the cave were finally freed, thanks to Layla and the rest of the dragons being able to use Magnus's own inventions to free them. So I'll just say I'm going to go with that moment because it was what to expect. Then we got Iced Out, and okay, this one has more moments to choose from. I did find it very fascinating when Burple basically shocked everyone out of the waters with being able to regurgitate a rock that would spark a flame, much to Aggro's shock, but I didn't really want to choose it just because I feel like I would commiserate with Aggro after the fact. So then, I guess I could talk about the whole adventure with Aggro and Elbone basically rescuing a dragon's egg. That was pretty cool, but then again led to them being in a catastrophic situation. So in my personal standpoint, I do like the part where they were eventually saved, especially when Cutter was the one who used his fire to restore Aggro's power. That was something that was very impactful, that really sets the tone of their working relationship on the team. So with that ended up being my choice. Next up, we got Sick Day, and there's a few that come to top of my mind. I consider the scene with Dak struggling to take care of the sick dragons because it was just humorous seeing him really endure this role of nursing them as they continue contracting those symptoms. And that one scene of him being essentially air launched into the den because of Burple was just the cherry on top, but I didn't go with that. And then I also considered the scene of Summer and Layla finally being able to succeed in their mission, but I feel like I tend to choose too much of these kind of final moments that satisfy the episode instead of a moment that stands out to me the most. So I decided to pick the moment that Summer and Layla really embrace each other after seeing how much of the former struggle. So it was pretty heartwarming enough to be my top pick. Then we got Bad Egg, and I have a few choices. I mean, Cutter even choosing to essentially trap Magnus in the egg was good enough karma for him, but definitely was not my pick. I did consider the scene of the team trying to stop the hatched dragons from making noise, but little too late, and I'm not going to pick that. I also wanted to consider the whole chase sequence with the Iron Claw, but then again, it stemmed from misunderstanding, which is the kind of tropes that I personally do not like, so not my pick. So I ended up selecting the scene of Cutter clearing the air with the Iron Claw, and also in a way to really reflect on a bit of growth for Cutter, realizing that sometimes his antics are not ideal and would lead to catastrophic messes like this. So that's the moment I'm gonna choose. Now for Home Alone, which I think everyone knows how much I think this episode's probably a very forgettable one, despite being a parody of the original material, which then again could have been done better. But anyways, I think I do have an easy choice, but I will run through some contentions. I mean, the whole adventure with Duggart, because he seemingly was too shy to open up that he just wanted to fly with the dragons. The whole showdown with the Slinkwings and the Dre Underdog dragons was pretty cool, and I was close to picking the scene of Burple regurgitating those colored rocks that resemble the eggs that easily tricked the Slinkwings to grab them, thinking that he had laid down his sword. But then again, for us viewers, at that moment, we thought Burple really relented, and honestly, it's not really surprising considering he's coming from Burple himself, so I'm not going for that. So what I ended up picking was Discovery falling after that when the Slinkwings find out that they were outsmarted, and really all they ended up getting was rocks. And with Snoop, although a bit cringy, at least giving some humor at that moment, added more to this scene, so this is what I'm gonna pick. Then we get to Slaughter Power, and this is tough as I had a lot of really strong contenders to choose from, which while minimal, at least they are something of note to take away. So starting off with the moment of Cutter trying to now take care of that new hatched baby dragon, which was fun enough, and seeing how much those baby dragons kind of took a lot of his antics and made him suffer as he was on the other end was sort of unique to see. And then I was very close to picking the moment where everyone got tangled on the vines, because it was just such a fun level of tension to see them really face this unexpected adversity. And I bet most people would probably pick the scene just because please, but for me, I'm not going for this moment. So what I ended up picking was the one we would anticipate with them finally being free from their vines, and that's all thanks to Cutter and that baby dragon's drool being able to melt them off. So that's what I ended up picking. Then we get to Crash Course, and there's some to choose from. I mean, the whole beginning plot revolving around Winger being this idol to Burple because of his cool moves, and yeah, the show could have portrayed it like he's a show-off. I definitely would say he is not anywhere close to Maming's level of show-off.
I take that as a compliment.
But anyways, I also considered the subplot with Cutter where he was eventually caught faking his situation, even though really he was legit. He eventually unstuck himself and then took advantage of that afterwards. But anyways, my most really came down to the climax where I wanted to pick the moment where after Burple and Winger struggles to fly simultaneously, they eventually did. I just feel like the other moment where Dak would eventually figure that idea stood out to me more, and that also is kind of cool because it was like everything had to be lined up for this solution to take place, so that's why I picked it here. Next, Furious Fun, and I don't got lots to choose from, so I was considering picking the moment where Agro met Cinda and LeBurn, but I think for me, I'm better off with picking the part where they were rescued, because that was surely needed after the amount of impulsivity from LeBurn and Cinda's end that got Agro in trouble too, so that's why I picked this one. Anyways, move on to Grumblegard, the first part, and it's kind of brutal as this is a very Winger-focused episode, giving a lot around his growth, but this first episode was mostly a setup to that. So anyways, for some contenders, there was the moment that the group were being blown away and landing onto the sea stack, because that was something of note. I also considered the humorous moment of Winger attempting to do the Mega Blast but ended up recoiling, which gives us this very humorous shot, but I didn't go for that. And then I will say at least the final scene of the battle with Winger being able to blast some rocks to cave in on Grumblegard, but I just feel like storytelling wise, it was just not as satisfying as it could have been. So what I ended up picking was kind of a similar situation with Layla and Summer. I ended up picking Dak and Winger embracing each other, especially with Winger putting some doubts in himself, not feeling like he can be anywhere to his mom's level, and Dak being there to comfort him was really heartwarming and shows a lot to this dynamic between the two. Because of that, that's my pick. Now moving on to Grumblegard Part 2, and this one has more of its merits as it's the culmination of Winger's growth arc, so because of that, I think there's a very easy answer for me, but I still can run through some choices that I had in consideration. I mean, the whole beginning part of Grumblegard essentially wrecking through the town was pretty intense, but I didn't go with it, and then I guess I can mention when Grumblegard finally came over to the team side, and from here on then, he would eventually become a loyal ally of theirs, but I didn't go for it, and then lastly, I considered another moment of Winger just feeling a bit doubtful, but Grumblegard of all characters giving him a sweet one-on-one to try and build up his determination. But come on, you can't pick a moment like this when you have that moment where he fulfills everything, where he would eventually do his Mega Blast that would defeat the Slinkwings. And honestly, that moment is way more satisfying and would be a big mistake not to pick this one when it's like the epitome of Winger's development. Because of that, this is why I picked this scene. So then we move forward to Double Finked. I've got very little to choose from because I barely have any connection to this episode, but what I did consider, the part that Axel meets his uncle in like years was notable, but I feel like the whole awkwardness surrounding him was just not ideal, and so my pick ended up being that rescue part where they saved him from that Ramblefang that has played with him like a toy. So with that, with no other explanation, this is my pick. So then next up, Dive Wings. A few came to my mind. The part where they entered through the whirlpool portal to the Dive Wings home was interesting. Also, plot-wise, I also did like the end when they were able to remove all of the litter that was left in the sea, but I didn't choose that. And I was also pretty close to picking the moment they met the Dive Wings, where they were met with some very hostile attitude, which did partially rub me the wrong way, so I didn't choose that. So what I ended up picking may not be the most compelling in the world, but I felt like this one stood out to me a lot, and that is the part where Layla and Dak pretty much switched Dragon State right on because it's pretty unique to see, you know. I always like seeing things a bit different than the usual, and this is what makes a great example of that. Next up, we got Mesha Menace. Don't got much to say. I mean, there's the part where they rescue Axel. That's something, but I didn't go for that. And then I should also talk about the end part where because Magnus is as ludicrous as always, it leads to the team having to save the day and put on their own sort of show to entertain the town. But I didn't go for that despite the cool aesthetics. So what I ended up picking is just another random choice. It's when Winger bumped into the machine, essentially sacrificing his strengths just to keep the town safe, which, I mean, fine enough, but also a strong characterization of him as a very protective figure. And the line following this where he just encourages his concerned friends to go after the machine really shows how he does not vow to put himself before others. And here he is enforcing his morals for his friends to comply with. Then we got Summer Holiday, and it's kind of another brutal case as I always think of this episode really highly. So my choices just come down to which one is the most that gives. And so to run through, I did consider the beginning part with their little struggle with some giant eggs in a basket, but it didn't have much to offer. I also thought of the scene when they settled themselves on the island that they would spend their time for their holiday, but that would just be a bit simple. And then for some character moment, I mean for Winger, I always found that humorous when we got that shot of him putting on a very fun grin and he's trying to mask off the energy that he's trying to give out just to maintain his own sort of standards. But I didn't go for that, and then I was close to picking the moment that Finn saved the day after the amount of times that he kept on being a dead weight to everyone. But it was just in a world where it was fairly predictable, so what I ended up picking is one of his faux pas is when he ended up gaining the team nest that would end up causing them to itch, and it was just so humorous with the reaction, so I'm gonna pick this one. Next we got Treasure Riders. Let's talk things through. The team meeting Waldondo was a cool introduction to his character, already showing how fierce he is. I also considered the whole adventure with them, especially going through the cave, but it just felt like it dragged on a bit too long. And then I might as well talk about the moment that Waldondo traps them, giving us a sort of twist villain sort of vibe to show that he was truly evil, but the signs were there that kind of took away from it. And then lastly, I considered the moment that he was defeated, which is always what satisfies me, but a moment like this is overtaken by one that I personally like better, and that one is when the dragons tried to ram through the trapdoor only to just recoil back, and it was just humorous seeing them just flopped onto the ground. And in general, moments like those where there's humors around it is just what I like about them. So because of that, that's my pick. Then we move on to Puff Enough. Okay, to the point, the part where the team met Zepla was fine, but I didn't go with it. I also did not choose the moment when they were training her, but I did find some fun with her when she constantly kept puffing up and knocking everyone out of her way, but that was not my selection. And then the last one to consider was when the team got themselves stuck in quicksand because of her and the whole tension surrounding it, but I didn't choose that. So the moment that I ended up picking was when she saved them all, which was able to show the redemption in her abilities despite the downside of them at times. So with that said, this is my pick. So next, moving on to Hot Hot Hot. There's a few I did consider. The little dream sequence Burple had was fun enough, just seeing how much Burple was really imagining himself to be to the hierarchy, but ultimately didn't go for that. I also considered the moments where the team were just trying to keep an eye on Aggro as she is constantly trying to leave without any explanation, but that wasn't my pick. And then for the moments that Aggro was stuck in the volcano, there was a choice of like when Winger tried to rescue her but ultimately failed, because even the volcano itself could be the best dragon of the team. There's also the part of Magnus's machine almost saving her, but the situation just not panning out. So what I ended up choosing was Burble's coronation moment of him being the one to save Aggro on the spot, because we definitely needed more of him to take out the spotlight, even though it's just going to be for one episode. But then again, that satisfies the plot of the episode. I'm going with this one. Next up are high anxiety. Let's talk about scenes that were close to making the cut. I mean, the whole tension when the Modern Article was sliding down the side of the mountain, that was very intense. And then also acknowledge the part where Hanar was able to fix the situation, as well as having some bravery for her fear, was delightful enough, but I think there was just one moment that stuck out to me more, and that is when Winger gave this very empowering speech. However, he forgot one thing: Hanar doesn't talk dragon, so all she kept on hearing was dragon noises, and that's just such a silly turn of events that I could not stop taking away from, so this is the pick. Then we move forward to King Burple. I mean, first off, Burple even being the king of flyhoppers in general was just something to know for the main plot of the episode. Not to mention the beginning sequence when he was struggling to catch those dummies. They're at least pretty striking to set up the episode's tone. The basically final battle with the wolves was decent enough, but not enough to crack the pick. And then for circumstances outside of Burple's main plot, I mean the subplot with finding Elbone's rock with like that moment where he caused Winger to crash into the rock pile was definitely a noteworthy moment. Follow that up with Burple eventually finding Rocky for him. Yeah, cool enough that he'll be the one to resolve everything here. But what I ended up picking was a mostly heartwarming moment where Burple places Oscar in the leading position, because I mean, come on, that should have been obvious to begin with. So with that, there's no need to really explain more of this. This is my pick. Then we get to Charged Up, probably the most forgotten episode of the series. Alright, enough said. Some moments that did pop for me, like that final battle with Magnus's Mechano Dragon, was definitely a highlight, but then again, it was just done in the most unremarkable way, so I'm not going to choose that. So what I ended up picking was mostly a moment of stun, and that is when we had that beginning sequence with them testing the dragon's powers on the target, and Winger shocking everyone with his power blast being able to reach a far distance than everyone else. Like, I'm sure that was pretty clear cut to everyone to begin with. But yeah, with him following up with a bit of a humbling expression, gave it enough of the merits for me to pick this one. Then we get to Belly Flop, and I think there is a bit of a definitive answer for me, where while we had the likes of a moment like the beginning with Summer getting everyone through a routine, that was decent, while we had the part where they would eventually be able to free Elbone and Summer out of Gledge's mouth using Dak's bad cooking, but I didn't choose that, so what I ended up picking was the original recipient of that, with Dak's terrible cooking leading to Cutter and Winger just feeling so out of it at that point, and personally, I just find that more humorous than much elsewhere this episode. So that's going to be my pick. Now to Game of Horn. And while I do have an easy answer, I still have some pretty close picks in my eyes. I mean, first up, we have that funny brief part of Winger just saying he likes writing poetry, because I guess it does relax him. Duggar's training, which was sure going to go well for him. And then I will talk about the final moment of Burple being able to win the race for Duggar to be re-elected. That was obviously great, and what makes it even glorious is that it was him beating Magnus to him, because Magnus obviously sucked. But how could I pick that over the scene of when Duggar finally accepted adopting Dak and Layla as his kids? Like, it was very heartwarming, and seeing the dragon's very soothing reaction adds on top of this empowering scene. So through that, this is my choice. Now if we move forward to the specials, starting with obviously Hunt for the Golden Dragon, and from what was in contention, the whole confrontation with the pirates was a nice setup for the eventual conflict that would take place in the special. The part where Waldondo arrives, which gives him a pretty fun hostile reunion with the team, where they're obviously not happy to see him after the events of Treasure Riders. The part where Svetlana trapped the team on a sticky globe was very remarkable, but I didn't choose that. And I also was close to picking scenes with the Golden Dragon herself, like like the first one when we were introduced to her, showing off her gold blast was a cool little visual. And then obviously the hatching of the baby golden dragon, because that was surely anticipated through the end of the episode. But I think in my personal opinion, while the scene does get glossed over a bit, it's gotta be the visual of the cameos of symbols depicting dragons from How to Train Your Dragon. Like, come on, if you're coming in as an original fan of the franchise, you cannot stop grueling for this scene. Like, it was so surreal to see their canon representation on the show, which obviously can lead to the conspiracy that maybe the show isn't canon to the franchise, but I ain't gonna dwell upon that too much. I love this cool cameo moment, so that's gonna be my pick. Next, we got Secrets of the Song Wing. There are some parts to choose from. I mean, from the get-go, when we had Layla's solo singing, felt like a vibe to me, but I didn't go for that. And then, in speaking of, the whole moment of Melodia's first song was just very striking to me, and while I could have picked this one as it was much of a big standout moment to me, I feel like there's another part that really recontextualizes everything. And then the last part I considered was when Melodia finally reunited with her soulmate, because that was quite needed after understanding why she did what she did. But for me, I think it's better off that I choose the final basically sing showdown between her and Layla, where Layla Singh was able to tap everyone back into their senses, and this was just a unique way to at least defeat Melodia's powers, even though I will sympathize for Melodia when everything crumbled around her, but still a satisfying way to really get the situation back in shape. So this is going to be my pick. And then for the final special, we have Huts Galore Holiday, and I have a plethora that I wanted to list out. First being the whole beginning when the team decided to play around in the new snow conditions, which was a nice moment to see them relax for a bit before they had a big storm coming. But anyways, talking about that, I also wanted to consider the parts where those hectic storms came overwhelming the town, which was very intense, but wasn't enough to be my pick. The team meeting the Chill Blasters was fine enough. I mean, the whole battle with the Arctic Wolves was a standout as well, but I didn't go for that. I also considered like when the team redecorated the Christmas tree since the other one fell apart, and also the moment with the father Chill Blaster and him getting to reunite with his children. That was a sweet moment, but ultimately from a storytelling perspective, my favorite moment is the final part when the team were able to successfully pull the boat full of presents out of the ice it was stuck in, and it was also thanks to Grumblegard's strong breeze to help them accelerate. So that was a very bittersweet moment to satisfy the plot for the episode. So that's gonna be my pick. So then we move on to Chiefless, which is an episode that I do have some level of apathy for because there's really much that really resonate with me. But talking things through, there are moments like the beginning activity that was pretty distinct. The whole adventure that Layla's group go on with it basically being a scavenger hunt just for the goblet was fine enough. I also did consider when Dak was showing off some cool things to Ingrid, but I didn't go for that. And then the potential battle that would have ensued with the dragons having to fight them off. But definitively for me, I just picked the moment that Purple revealed to be the one who was holding the goblet the whole time, just so it eased up all of the issue that was occurring. So with that, I went for this choice. Next up for Crystal Clear, where there isn't really a definitive stick-out moment to me, but to talk things through, I obviously did consider when Cutter tried to gloat about his power eventually outstanding wingers, which cool in a way, I guess it lays into his ditzy nature, but at the same time does annoy me because how dare you do that to Winger? Like seriously, the whole dance was just not doing much for me, so I didn't go for that. And then the last part I wanted to consider was the final chase with the wild boars because it was thrilling, but it just wasn't right for me to choose it as my top pick. So anyways, my personal answer will be when Winger was able to have his powers upgraded by the crystal, which haha, in your face, Cutter. But yeah, pretty cool visual too. That's why this is gonna be my pick. Then we move on to How I Met Your Summer. What a great episode this was. So it's going to be brutal for me to pick a defining best moment that I personally like. So to list things through, I did like the part where we got to the flashback and when Layla eventually got lost from her pack, but I didn't go for that. I also like this little back and forth between Dak and Winger on whose story is actually legit, but that did not end up being my answer. And on top of that, I considered the whole sequence with the eel, and especially on Dak's side of the story where we had a surreal moment of a panicked Winger, which had already stuck out to me, but I didn't go for it. And then I lastly considered Summer actually meeting Layla, and it was heartwarming to see, but for me, there's just one moment that really struck me, just from a more humiliating lens, in that Layla and Summer actually shared their side of the story that Dak and Winger were facing a dire situation with the pirates after Winger got caught in the net. And overall, I just felt so bad for him, while Dak just was completely helpless in that spot. But thankfully, his sister and her new friend were able to save them. So with that, this is my pick. Then next up we got Snooping Around. I don't believe I have a solid answer for this one, but some moments that I do remember. The entire adventure with Snoop trying to find a baby Slinkwing was very interesting, especially when he's working with the team after how much hostility they have towards him and his crew. But this plot does link into a much more important storyline later on in the series, but I didn't go for that. And then I also consider when Summer and Purple were just struggling to take care of the baby Slinkwing, and honestly I feel bad for them. They were kind of in like cutter spot back in like the Slobber Power episode, but I didn't go for that. So what I ended up picking is just some random choice of mine, which is Dakin Winger's distraction on Visa as the others dealt with their own business in the garden. And honestly, I just feel like this was something that stood out to me, not only because of the whole concept of the distraction method, but also the combination where Visa believes she defeated the team, even though you did barely any crap to take down their power. But I just think her reaction was just so ironic considering what happens later on. But yeah, definitively, this really stood out to me the most, so that's gonna be my answer here. Then next up we have Oh Brother. Oh dear, I have too much apathy for this one as well. But let's push that aside. Let's talk about moments that stuck out to me. I mean, the whole scavenger hunt for Elbone's whereabouts was just decent, but we really needed that to drag out the episode. Not. Elbone pretending to be the chief just to play up this act in front of his brother? I don't think so. And then I should talk about the sequence with Glutch ruining the dinner the brothers were gonna have all because they were in his territory, which that was just frustrating. But anyways, my pick ends up being kind of a shtick that I like with these characters embracing each other, and that's the same when Elbone and Albone have a moment to embrace, as well as the fact that Albone also looked up to his brother as well. All of skills that he himself wouldn't be able to acquire if it wasn't for his brother's ability. So that was heartwarming enough to have this moment be my answer. And then onwards to the Sunken City episode, there's a few picks to highlight. The sequence with the dragons trying to search for a clue was already a decent start to the tone of the episode. Them encountering that octopus and then eventually battling it in the library was pretty insane. I also remember Summer's sonar power, and it was great to see how it worked, though I would say it was only used once throughout the series, so I don't even think that's very impactful in the grand scheme of things. So for me personally, I went with the final scene of when Purple revealed that he swallowed some of the tablets to bring back from the library, and it was a great scene to really set up that there was a lot more continuity with the series, and it got me more excited. So with that, I personally went with this scene. Okay, so next up we got Teamwork is Magic. There's a few to consider. The team meeting Sparkle for the first time and rescuing her was alright, but unbeknownst to them, what evil was really looming in her mind, even though it wasn't really as vicious as it was portrayed. And then I did consider that one second when she woke up Cutter and gave him pretty much the blind eye after she blasted a rainbow of power at him, but I didn't go with that, so I ended up picking the moment where she and Cutter eventually worked together to get them out of the trap they were in, because you all know what's gonna work? Because of that, this is easily my answer here. Okay, the next time we got the Incredible Purple. I had some parts to consider, like the moment Purple finally had some crystal worked and upgrade his spitting power. That was nice for him. And then I'll talk about the moment that Winger accidentally made a humongous power blast because everyone forgot about the blue crystal next to him. But I didn't go with that, so my pick ends up being when Purple was able to save everyone because he utilized his power with the crystal to bust his way through the rocky wall. So that was a very hectic rescue sequence. Following that, we have Light of the Stinkwing. There's like the moment that with that one villager being like expressing the awful spell before continuously collapsing. Cause really, the team trying to eliminate Whiffy's bad odor, but still not succeeding. That was a segment to talk about. And then let's say when Whiffy was able to use his sting power to push away his predators, like really going to show that there's a lot of merits to his power as well. But for me, definitively, it is the moment where Whiffy finally found his freedom from his bad smell and was able to have a refreshing odor, which was very fulfilling to see. So with that, that is my answer. So then next up, the Big Sheep, and there was a lot of definitive choices here, and one of them that I ended up cutting might be a bit of a shock, but let's talk about them. We had the moment of Summer sussing out that there was some activity with the targets in the previous night, which goes to show her expertise. Shockingly, I left out the moment that Burke was mentioned by Duggar. Like all in all, if you're coming into the show as a massive super fan of the original franchise, of course you'd be elated to hear the mention of it. But I feel like this moment doesn't really strike out to me as much and doesn't really compare to the dragon symbols in the Hunt for the Golden Dragon special. So with all that, I didn't choose this one, and otherwise I also didn't select the birth of Steve, which while it is a very touching moment to see, I just think there's another one that really stuck out to me and kind of felt very ironic. So what I ended up picking was when Steve's parents was able to protect them from the wolves. Like sheep beating the wolves, that's unheard of. But hey, if it's to protect their babies, then go ahead. This moment perfectly highlights their love for him. So personally, I'm choosing this moment. Anyways, our next episode, Rescue Racers. Finally, another Winger-focused episode, though I'll say tad watered down compared to the others, but whatever. Let's talk about moments that didn't make the cut. Winger chasing after the Zoomerangs. That was such an intense introduction to them, essentially adding to his competition. I will say I did find some humor when Blazo's two fellow Zoomerang friends kept squishing against Winger's face, thus to basically put mockery on him, but I didn't go for it. And I also did like the training segment with Winger, where poor him, he was just absolutely exhausted doing all of that flying, but ultimately didn't go for it. And one final moment that does stuck out to me, but I didn't pick, was when Blazo passed the finish line before Winger and tried to gloat about her win, which technically you didn't win. Winger would have beaten you, but he sacrificed his win just to save your life. So shut up with all that gloat and have a little more tactfulness. And I also have some secondhand embarrassment for Winger in this scene too, feeling like he let down his team even though reality spoke otherwise. Anyways, the moment I picked was obviously when he saved Blazo, because it shows him right there how much he is willing to be protective even for those who he does not have a strong connection with, which is a great emphasis on his character in general. So because of that, that's going to be my answer. And then today without dragons, another one that I have some level of apathy with, but to be open on things I did consider, Layla and Dax back and forth on who is better off without their dragons. That was some conflict that we definitely needed just to spice up this challenge, even though that didn't really last long. The dragons themselves not being able to handle being off without Dax and Layla, that is one aspect to really highlight their dynamic with them. And then to talk about the aspect of Dax and Layla being able to operate Magnus's machine just to try and save the day. That was pretty surreal to see them pretty much team up. And then lastly, I did consider the final moment where the team reunited with each other and had a nice hug, as well as Snoop joining in. But ultimately, speaking of Snoop, he takes the cake for the best moment this episode, with him being able to save the day by fighting back against his own allies, which I'll be honest was to be expected after the team helped him with the baby's link win. So he definitely indebted them on this, and that paid off well. Anyways, now we move on to the Fatal Force Awakens. Well, to discuss some contenders, there was that one part with Dak and Winger literally wrestling with each other just to prove who was right or wrong with their sentiment. I did also consider the training audition for the other dragons to join Zeppela and Sparkle's team, but didn't go for that. And then I shall highlight the battle with the wolves, with the Influence Force team being able to save everyone who was trapped under the tree and fend off the wolves at the same time. But ultimately, I didn't go for that. So the following moment that I actually ended up picking is just that brief segment of Winger literally tearing up. Like, for real, this guy has emotions. Let that sink in. Because of that, this is personally gonna be my answer. Next up, Return to the Sunken City. And it's another one that I have an easy choice, but that doesn't stop me from talking about other choices I considered, like the team meeting the Bubble Gill. It was an okay introduction to them. Magnus's defeat was glorious after the amount of hubris he had, believing he is completely overpowered with the crystals he had, but I didn't go for that. And lastly, the scene of Winger being totally embarrassed after watching his friends imitate the dance moves he did, but I didn't do that, as why are you gonna pick that when you have the literal scene of him dancing himself? And to be honest, he got some moves, which, I mean, is a proxy of Magnus, but hey, at least it was nice to see Winger actually get some of those grooves, which I wish we had more of. But yeah, this is a very striking moment for me from this episode, and this is going to be my pick. Next, we got my Dragon Guard. And here I had some to consider, like when Cutter first met Talon and then saving him. That was a pretty good segment. Talon surprisingly popping up to the roost and startling Cutter in the process. That was humorous. Following that, we have Dak delivering a very awkward line of wishing for a dragon to protect him, even though Winger's literally right there. How dare you neglect his presence? Beyond that, we also have that final moment of when the team revealed that they pieced Cutter's statue back together, so at least they can all share a present for a party, which was nice enough. But ultimately, my favorite moment has to be when Talon repaid his debt to Cutter by saving his life, because that was something highly anticipated. And also, Fallon was able to eventually take Talon out of the picture, as he started to get a bit grating by the end of it. So because of that, I'm going to choose this moment. Then we get to Glutchtastic Voyage. There were some things I liked, like the moment with Winger ultimately crash landing as he tried to save the baby dragon, was just hilarious, and he does that twice throughout the episode, but this one was just fine. Summer heading back into Gledge's mouth, and ultimately I feel for her uncomfortability, because who even wants to be consumed by a very impulsive creature like him? Layla and Angro finding Oscar inside one of Gledge's belly was a bit of a shock, and then them eventually finding that dragon egg that was causing a lot of the pain in Gludge's tummy, so that eased up everything. But my choice ended up being what I just recalled earlier with the whole crash landing with Winger, and this is during that second time when it happened with Winger literally flipping over and Dak having to follow up with that was painful, which I'm sure was. You know, those baby dragons can be very unpredictable at the slightest, but anyways, I think this was a really fun moment, so I'm picking this. Anyways, we move on to Dragon Out of Water. And most of my picks really comes down to Splitch's involvement. So, to talk things through, I did consider, like, obviously the moment when the team met him for the first time when he was trapped underneath the ship, but I didn't go for that. And I was pretty close to selecting the moment that he fought back against the bullies because it was pretty fulfilling for him after he kept on trying to run away from them, even to dry land, which was what the plot was really about. But for me, for the humorous side, I just like the moment that he actually kept electrocuting a lot of the team, and the one with Winger in particular was just really humorous to watch. So without any further explanation, I think this is the moment that I like. Next up, we got Nest Day. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to go straight to the point because a lot of the moments were just by the numbers. So I'm just going to select the part where that mother dragon finally laid her eggs in a very comfortable nest thanks to the townspeople putting it together. So there's really no need elsewhere to talk about why I choose this because it's a moment that's fulfilling from when the storyline was established. So because of that, I'm picking this scene. Next, we got Full Metal Magnus. Like, seriously, can we get enough of this guy? But to speak on what moment truly stuck out to me, I mean, we had, like, Magnus meeting those razor tooths who kept consuming his metallic objects. We also had Magnus calling Winger a reptile, which is finally a reference to the original franchise when Hiccup called Toothless a useless reptile, but I didn't go for it. So what I ended up picking is a very savage moment when Winger intentionally slammed Magnus right into a sea stack because Magnus can shut the freak up sometimes. Which, hey, thanks Winger for knocking some sense into him. So through that, I personally believe this one is a perfect pick from this episode. Following that, we have Triple Trouble Tuesday. And while there was so much going on, there was not much that I truly just cared for. So while I did consider the moment where Lurk was defeated after a great distraction method, I ultimately picked the moment that Dak and Wing were eventually freed from the Slinkwing goo thanks to the strength of Magnus's loose machine. So I easily went with this pick. So then we move on to Where's Waldondo? And there is some to consider, like the whole collection of toys that were shown to Dak and Layla was fine enough for some slapstick humor. I guess I might as well just talk about that one snippet of Burble with Merida having to close a portrait door that contained a wolf, which was constantly seen throughout the intro that led to many speculation of when this episode would take place. But anyways, I was also close to the reveal that the Merida that was with the team was actually Waldondo himself the whole time on a disguise, which wow, he really knows how to cosplay, but then again, was not enough to crack the top choice. So what I ended up picking was the escape sequence where while Waldondo and Merida was caught up during the escape, they eventually found their ways to fight their way through their struggles. So because of that, this is going to be my answer. And then we get to the greatest show dragons, where it all stems from a backstory. So first to consider was when Layla humorously had to correct Arnold's labelings on the dragon species because he clearly had no knowledge of what they were. There's other moments like when Dak and Layla tried to offer up their dragons to join the show just for an attempt to help out the other dragons trapped inside, but I didn't go with that. And then I'll just talk about the whole segment of everyone practicing their tricks, but I decided not to go with that because I think the best part is when everyone was able to flee Arnold's show, and it was great to see those dragons who were enslaved by him now feel the freedom, and with Cutter and Burple joining the team after the fact makes this moment very well impactful as well. So because of that, I went for this one. So then we get to copy that, and there's like a bunch of scenes that are memorable to me in like the subplot with Layla joining Elbone's hot air balloon business because I think it was a very cool touch to this, but I didn't go for that. The remaining team eventually finding their way out of the Slinkwing goo was fun, and seeing their determination was really tangible as well. And while I could have picked the moment that Gemma, the golden dragon, used her golden blast to play with Gorsh's powers, that sort of leaves him permanently with her powers until he sees another dragon blast, and that won't be for a while, but I didn't go for that because I just felt like there was one moment afterwards that I found it so hilarious, and that's when he tried to like golden blast at Winger, but then the Swift Thing himself knocks the blast back at his eyes, and honestly his reaction is just so satisfying, showing that all of his actions would eventually come biting him back, and this was a pretty much good enough way to set up a one-off villain for this episode. So with that, this is my choice. And now lastly to NUR, the final episode to cap things off, and this one I have a playful amount of moments to talk about. The part where Winger and Summer will eventually meet Numo and confront him on his actions was a fine enough interaction, but following that we obviously have that major shift when Numo amnesia blasted the dragons, which was purely insane. And remember how I reacted to it? Oh, Numo, you idiot! very idiotic of him. I can also highlight the moment that Winger tried to swim in water only to fail, which I wish the scene didn't really cut out too much of it because it would have been fun to see his struggles, but I guess they had to save time, so there's that. Then we got the moment that Dak finally gets a semblance of memory when he sees Winger get hurt, and honestly, I always found the scene to be very heartwarming just to show how much this dynamic really means a lot between the two. But I still didn't go for that. And then the last scene, the final one really for the series, when they all embracingly hug each other and the scene and music fades out. But really for me, the definitive answer is when everyone finally had their memory restored and hugged it out with each other, and it was just such a great segment to see that all of the memory that they were able to restore stem from their power of love for each other. And that is pretty much the morale of this show. It's all about the strong connection you built with each other, and that helps you get out of difficult situations. And honestly, that is a great way to wrap it up for this final episode. So because of that, I think this moment easily takes the cake. But there we go. My listing of moments I like from each episode of Rescue Riders. Feel free to comment down below what you guys think, and also feel free to share your personal favorite moments from every episode. Click on like and tap subscribe for more videos like this down the road. So until then, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Going to see you in the next video.